Should be a very cut and dry subject matter, but this is something that seems like we are completely at odds with the world in these days, and it's probably one of the things that will probably be the most divisive topics within families. I think we could have better luck talking about systematic theology to an unbeliever than we would in talking about why the rights of the unborn should be protected to those who hold the pro-choice leanings. So, what I wanted to ask is, has anybody, well, obviously I can tell Ms. Beverly and Mr. Alvis are very active within a local ministry, helping out reproductive health for young expectant women. We know here in Texas that abortion has been severely restricted, if not completely outright banned, which is something we've been praying for well over 50 years now, but we still have it very much active in many parts of the country and including other parts of the world. So this is not an issue that's just gone by the wayside. And as we had our little funny video at the beginning, the pro-choice side is very much wanting to regain lost ground, and probably is in a very much a move for retribution in the loss of the overturning of Roe versus Wade. So what I wanted to do was go over the issue of abortion, are some of the, let's say, more philosophical issues we're going to deal with in talking about abortion, but mainly what we're going to be talking about is the difficult concepts of personhood in this class. And then we're going to segue into what a Christian theological account is on personhood, especially towards the sanctity of life, and in this case, the most precious life of all, that which is unborn, or yet to be born. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So I want to tell you on all this, I don't have a lot of my own material, so most of this material is going to come from Live Action. They are a anti-abortion group, very active and prominent in a lot of the, let's say, lobbying and activism leading up to the overturn of Roe v. Wade. But so I just want to let that be said. And this is one of the most disturbing numbers I had ever come to. After I became Christian, I had to obviously come to terms with what I had previously held about the idea of abortion. I held more or less what would be considered a secular, progressive view of abortion. That it was a woman's right. I viewed that the earth was overpopulated and that we needed to do anything we could do to kind of cut back on just the amount of babies that were being born, so we make this world more sustainable, which would be buzzwords that are still being used to this day. But then having that concept reframed in the fact that over 63 million lives have been taken since Roe versus Wade was put into effect in 1973, that was a wake-up call. If you want to view all life as sacred, why not if we're going to consider the unborn life sacred, this is the largest genocide ever committed. In World War II, the added death count of combatants and non-combatants, those people who suffered from starvation and plague that always ravage whenever war takes place, doesn't even come close to equaling this death count. Not even when, I'm bringing down his name, Genghis Khan killed a quarter of the population of your age, didn't ever come close to this body count. So, as we see on our screen, this is by and far the gravest mass human right abomination that's ever taken place, and it still continues. So, this is, as I've told you, I was trying to frame the argument that we can talk to our secular or our non-believer, I want to say that big old word again, interlocutors with. But I'm going to frame this argument out of just defining terms. So, the UN describes human rights as universal and inalienable rights that are inherent to every person. So beings have human rights, and we possess them by virtue of our humanity, and not because they're granted to us by government or other people. And these are the most foundational human right is the right to life. UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights highlights in Article 3, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the security of the person. And in Article 6, it says everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. In our own Declaration of Independence, which sets the groundwork for our nation, and I know we've all learned this in school, where it states that all men are created equal, they are endowed by their Creator certain unalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And you can't have any of those other rights without the first. So, in this modern day and era, or day and age, how do we hold to these concepts of human rights if we don't allow them to the unborn? If preborn human beings don't have these rights applied to them, how do you get around them? I mean, honestly, it's the question I'm asking you all. I know this is something that's going to be thrown at you. It seems so alien, right? Okay, well, move on.
No, what's so?
So, how, if you hold that human life is the highest right possible, it's the most sacred thing, like say sacred, even if you're not religious, you can hold that to be the highest standard, that the sanctity of human life is the most and highest right ever. How then can that right not apply to the unborn? Okay. Well, right. So we're going to be
living.
Yeah. So we're going to have to get the definition. This is what it always ends up boiling down to, is defining terms. So the argument is going to be, what is conferred as personhood? Do we confer this concept of humanity to this unborn baby? And unfortunately, the modern world does promote the killing of the unborn. So in some way, they either have to say it's not a human and thus not protected under these rights endowed upon the rest of humanity, or they have to make some sort of other excuse for it. And as I alluded to in my own previous experiences, it's quite interesting that you have a movement called long-termism that's promoting a lot of what we have in, let's say, changes that are happening to the world these days. I don't want to start sounding conspiratorial, but a lot of big minds get together and they try to think what would be the best for humanity moving forward. And then a lot of their philosophy is based under this concept of protecting the people who are yet to be born. Off in the future, say people 100 years from now are going to be suffering from, this is their words, all the carbon dioxide we're emitting into the environment, all of the dangers we're doing in factory farming, all of the negligence we're having with like say not getting vaccinated, or on the other hand, being careless in gene editing viruses and potentially making the next outbreak happen. But it's interesting, they hold this concept of people who have not even a chance yet, like
not even a gleam in their mother's eye.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it. That's a better way to put it, actually. Yeah, people who we don't even have the true instances of life happening. The union of the egg and the sperm becoming a gamete. But we have this concept, this vague concept of people living 100, 200 years in the future, that what we're doing now affects them, but they ignore the lives that are right now inside the womb. So I find that very
contradictory.
Exactly. Thank you for finishing my sentences today, because I'm actually having problems doing it. So.
It's almost like we know each other's
sentences. No, I guess it only works one way.
We can finish each other's thoughts.
Oh, FYI, I opened up I uploaded that YouTube video, didn't publish it, but make it known it's already you got tons of comments.
Oh, really? Yeah. Oh, yeah, I gotta look at it. I listened to it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, I listened to the podcast version of it.
Oh, wow, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, just a little aside here. I had a school project where I had to do an instance of public facing philosophy, so I interviewed Farrell, being he's an evangelist. That was the concept of how Christian philosophy can aid an evangelist in their evangelical work. And yeah, so it's actually, people are watching the thing. I'm like going, there's something wrong with you. You'll watch, this. You watch this ugly mug talking. So, anyways, well, you all do too. So.
It's not you.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Oh no, it was you.
Okay.
Oh no.
You are my, what do they call that when you have two comedians?
Well, you got the.
He's my straight. No, he's
Yeah, the
the
straight.
answer. I'm the straight
Yeah,
man.
there you go. It's like the Abbott and Costello, or yeah, exactly. All right, so now we're going to get into. We're going to be diving into a lot of the inconsistencies that are in the arguments that are pushed forth towards those who advocate for abortion. So we have some issues where this isn't defining humanity. So what makes is the victim's age what causes, let's say, the moral issues involved with, like, say, violence, like, say, a murder of somebody who's 15 years old, 50 years old, or 18. God, I'm sorry, I'm off track a little bit. So the concept of that we can have murder charges brought for killing somebody who's 50, 18, 2 years old, or even newborn, but yet not have that for those who are yet to be born. There's a little bit of a it's a conflict. We have to address that too.
Well, man.
Yes, please.
We're a lot of Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Get kind of I guess the showstopper for us, where it's like, oh crap, we got this conversation, we can go further. Is whenever you have somebody who believes it's just a ball of snot, a ball of goo. It's just
a ball of
it's
clump of cells.
a clump of cells. It's no different than an arm or a leg.
Mm-hmm.
Someone so chose to chop off their arm, to remove the arm or a cyst or a tumor.
Yeah.
Something that's growing off of them, not something that's growing inside them.
Yeah. I'm gonna go and jump into that because I don't quite deal with it much in the slides, but you're actually touching something important. So, two of the main arguments. Clump of cells. Okay. Well, what point of that time does that clump of cells become a human? This is an old philosophical argument. It goes all the way back to Aristotle and Plato. How many grains of sand do that heap? And that's called a Sorites problem. You always run into that. So you can never, it becomes a continuum. There's no one point where you can definitively say, okay, at this point, this becomes, it infers this category, trying not to use the big philosophical terms of this ontological category of what this is, that this becomes human. So you have to have it at either the beginning, or you have to set it somewhere off with a very clear definition as to what makes it human.
Or it's either present at the very beginning or it's never.
Yeah, well,
you see that was that's why they'll stay up until it's gone, traveled the birth canal, and is breathing fresh air. That it's not a human being. So the birth canal somewhere along this 6-inch vortex, it magically becomes person.
I was thinking of a black hole when you said that, but anyways. Yeah, that's exactly it. At what point does birth confer personhood? So you either, the first part was the Sorites argument. At what point does one cell, 2 cells, 4 cells become a viable human? And then we have to deal with the issues of viability, and that's going to be another issue. I do have that in later slides. But how then does this passage of the birth canal into humanity? And it seems to be that as soon as the baby's passed the birth canal, then it's no longer dependent, quote unquote, on the mother for the sustaining of its life. But we'll definitely cover in how that argument falls apart.
Yeah, well, I think it falls, I think it falls apart where if the person says, no, it's just a clump of cells, it's no different than a tumor. And then they say, well, at 6 months, it is now a person.
Yeah.
Or now it's kind of evil or bad if you dismember it because it looks like a baby. It looks like if you were to take it out, it would look like a real small infant.
Yeah.
But so what I'm saying is then if they state that that is a person at 6 months, then it has to have been a person all along.
Yeah. Or what are your necessary and sufficient conditions that define?
Yeah, there would have to be some sort of special condition.
Yeah, and there's two other arguments you push back. You mentioned either an arm or cancer, right?
Yeah.
And this is where you definitely dive into philosophy. So neither a tumor nor an arm on their own can develop into a fully formed human. In fact, neither are sustainable on their own. None of them have, and this is what we would call a telos or a purpose that's inherent into things. And this is what the modern world has thrown out. It's built into Christianity, it's into ancient philosophy, but the concept of a purpose always ends up meaning that there was some sort of a higher plan for existence. So that is one of the reasons why they've thrown out this whole concept, and there's no longer the idea that this lump of cells has the potential of becoming a human. It is just a lump of cells until somebody confers by act of law, theological law, that it is now a person. Yes, right.
If there's going to be any kind of discussion prior to, think about it. What if it's dragged after? Because one of the discussions in there as to why is abortion okay when they figure out that the child is not going to be cognitive or is not going to have a regular life.
Exactly, yeah.
So then you're defining, so what happens after you file it? What if he's born? I see video. I see a video of this young man preaching now. He's already a man. He's on the table most of the time because he has no hands and no feet. I don't know if y'all have seen that.
I've seen it.
But oh my God, is he powerful?
Yeah.
So if you saw somebody like that come out and you say, oh no, that is bad to let him live like that. Terminate him. What's the difference between that argument and the other one?
Yeah.
You got no right to do that at all.
No, he draws a good point because there's no difference.
Yeah, this is what's the concept of human well-being or human flourishing, which in the modern era seems to be what is the highest form of ethic we have. It's really hard to define, but it's also what you're talking about from this concept of well-being, that this person doesn't have the prospects of having what we consider a normal fulfilled life, and what we consider a normal life, whatever that is, then somebody has, or if they have the cognitive ability, they have the right to their own life. So I'm kind of see how that works into euthanasia there. So then how do you define what is a good life? Because that definition can move it into itself too. So what other conditions can then we, using this line of reasoning, in a pregnancy, into human life, say, if somebody has like some cognitive disability, do we eventually down the road move straight into eugenics, like it was done within, say, Nazi Germany and many other countries back in the early part of the 20th century?
It's still happening a lot in China.
Exactly. So
in Netherlands, what was it today? Just it was on the news.
I didn't see the news today.
First, age 1 to 12, parents can now euthanize those children if see the quality of life is not.
Yeah.
By the way, I didn't see that, but that fits right into what I'm talking about.
See, you know what? I know that this is an apologetics class, but if you allow me to for just a few seconds, I want to take it into evangelistic area. That reminds me of Romans 1. God's judgment on a people where at first he gives them bad leaders. Then you start seeing men being effeminized. Then it's okay to have homosexuality. Then the people themselves become reprobate and lose the ability to think for themselves. And that is exactly what we're seeing, because it's God removing his hand off of that country. If this is indeed the truth, where you can go by and you can murder preteens because they might be burdensome on certain people.
Well, that's actually more theological than evangelical. We're actually going to touch base with that in the second half.
Oh, sorry.
That's fine. That's what I love about y'all. I don't have to explain stuff out to y'all. You all take this and you're processing it, and God, y'all make me proud. Okay, so
You're welcome.
so this is a simple concept. Well, simple to us, but the science teaches that human beings begin at the moment of spermatic fusion, otherwise known as fertilization. This is something that I don't think we have an issue with. I'm just going to move through these. Does anybody want me to read through any of these slides, or are they just happy to see them up on the screen? Because I think for most of us, this is either stuff we learned in high school health class, or stuff that we normally work with as trying to talk to the world about abortion. But main reason is I've got a lot of setup here. I'd let you guys read this for a while on your own, but we need to move forward because we only have like an hour and 15 minutes for the class. So these are just, I just want to get to the meat here rather than a lot of the supporting information that we have. So we have different ways we can consider the beginning of life. So we were talking about where does this concept of life begin from this clump of cells, and where does it become a human? So if you don't want to stay at the initial inception of fertilization, you've got the two alternatives, actually maybe more, of implantation. It's just a change of location from the fallopian tubes to the uterus. And I find that very hard to fathom on how that infers humanity to the fetus, or heartbeat, or brain waves, but these are developmental milestones. And then those have, once again, natural implications towards those who may be on life support, maybe in a coma. Pain sensation, another stage in development which may never occur, because there's some people who actually have congenital disorders where they don't have sensitivity to pain. Consciousness, another state of development. And in this case, it becomes another more slippery slope because we don't have a really good working definition on what consciousness actually is. And if anybody who wants to challenge me on that one, they don't know the literature in philosophy and mind right now. The modern world will typically hold to like some sort of a behaviorist or an emergent view that somehow consciousness emerges out of physical process, and that's probably the more common conception of it. But then that runs into the same Sorites problem. So how many neural connections do you have? How many neural synapses working together, firing in conjunctive order, do you have before this thing called consciousness emerges from that? So then you're right, it's just, once again, another issue where it becomes very difficult to define.
So would that be like self-awareness?
Well, what is self-awareness?
Yeah, that's one of the.
There's a concept called a philosophical zombie, or a P-zombie. This is an interesting concept where you have people who you may talk to on a day-to-day basis. I don't know if they're going to be proof of them, but they may not be aware of themselves. There are animals out there can you think of certain animals that you say, okay, I don't think they have self-consciousness?
Yeah.
You know your dogs do, right? I know my dogs do. But does that fly that's buzzing around your face, is it conscious of itself, or is it just operating off of instinct? A sea slug, I would say no, but at what point does then that self-awareness, where does that come from? Yes, Rod?
Well, you have fight or flight. Okay, so any organism that has a fight or flight, I would say, has that ability. However, a human, we're talking about humans here, so what about when you're asleep?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're gonna euthanize anybody, that would be time to done.
Yeah.
Because they're asleep.
Well, they're technically not conscious.
Really, they're not conscious, they
Or
can't
that faulty
fight,
state of consciousness.
you'd have to wake up.
Yeah, that would take more
Wake
like.
them up to make sure
Yeah,
they're
attuned to somebody who's in a coma, definitely. But yeah, so the first part, fight or flight, we actually have two separately operating but parallel nervous systems. And we talked about the sympathetic nervous system. It's our animal nervous system. It's the part that causes us to react. If anybody who's ever had any issues with anxiety, that emanates from that nervous system. But then you have higher order animals that have the ability to reason, like such humans, dogs, are smarter. The smarter critters out there that can do some problem solving on their own and definitely have memories. Yeah. What?
Cats.
Oh yeah, they're plotting.
Cats are the ones
They're plotting the end of the world.
They use humans. Dogs don't.
Yeah.
And dogs, they wag their tail and look at you and just wiggle there, but cats, nah. They just sit there and think, what can I get out of this person?
Yeah.
They strategize.
They do. Well, that does infer intelligence, which is great. Yeah, I think they're more nefarious than they're intelligent. Okay, so sorry, back on track here. It's all right. It's me. So I would like to argue life begins at conception. I think that's something we as Christians would all hold to. That human life begins at fertilization, and after fertilization, human being continues to develop. And since human rights are grounded in being human, not in a person's age, level of development, or location, human embryos and fetuses have the same inalienable and universal right to life as human infants, toddlers, teenagers, and adults. And once again, once you have the sperm and the egg coming together, you have what is going to develop into a human life. So that has all the powers and potentials of humanity in that one unifying self at that instance. So what else could you say is humanity? So you end up having to define something else. Is humanity non-biological? Is it a concept? Is it a legal term? And that's what we're going to be having to deal with here. And this is the issue of personhood. So what about personhood, some might ask? If the embryo isn't conscious, rational, or self-aware, doesn't that mean it's not a person? Well, first, the right to life is grounded in the biological category of human, not in a legal or philosophical label of person. That's why they're called human rights and not person rights. So this is interesting. So this is something that's popped in my head. So the concept of humanity, if it doesn't emerge from physical processes, and this is what the world holds to, and the world is largely non-theistic, but they're holding to some metaphysically separate thing that they call human. That almost seems like they're trying to pull that out of old distinctions that come from Christianity. The idea that humanity doesn't come from the flesh, but it comes from for us, the spirit being breathed into us. But this is something that doesn't. That's what I'm trying to say. They're already like, okay, no, we're already thinking that humanity isn't tied to the flesh. So what's this kind of like semi-spiritual thing y'all are talking about here? That's just me riffing, so I can imagine I get some pushback on that, but I think I might look into that later. So secondly, humanity has an ugly history of defining the term person so as to exclude certain groups of humans. If it's wrong to deprive women, black people, and Jews of their personhood based on the criteria of sex, skin color, and ethnicity or religion, it is also wrong to deprive the preborn of their personhood based on the criterion of age. And since all humans have the fundamental right to life, and since the preborn are human, and since humans are persons, it is evident that abortion would always be wrong. So that's a philosophical argument there. You don't really want to break down arguments into the philosophical constituents. Yeah, Rod.
If you stop and think, all this started because we inserted a word, abortion.
Mm-hmm.
What's the difference between abortion and killing?
Nothing. There's no difference.
There's no
Murder.
difference. We could say murder, we could say killing, we could say genocide. Any word you put in there, that's abortion.
Well, that's an interesting thing.
So really and truly,
yeah.
they're trying to soften us into thinking that it's not murder, or that it's not killing. The worst part about abortion is who's doing the killing. See?
Exactly.
The sad part, it's usually the only man.
Yeah. intimate
When
relationship.
you talk about abortion, you're talking about killing, you're talking about genocide, because it has become, according to that figure you just put up there, it was genocide. It's been genocide.
Indeed.
The theological question arises then, philosophical, definitely. If someone really doesn't believe that that's a human, to them, it is a murder.
No.
No.
Well, now you're not even talking theologically now.
No, you can once you define the
It's-
theological concept of personhood.
Well, you could, but what I'm saying is theology
See,
is, you're saying that somebody that's not theologically, inclined
Yeah.
or available or whatever you want to call it, then they can go ahead and do abortion because theologically they're guilty.
I would argue that they hold to a theology, but it's a theology itself.
Yeah, yes.
Well,
I would argue that regardless of whether or not they think it's a human, it is still undeniably murder.
Yeah.
Even for them.
Yeah. So if killing unnecessarily killing a human being is defined as murder, and you define a fetus, which we're going to talk about that term in a second, as murder, then yeah, that's a philosophically sound argument. But yeah, so what we have is the concept of, I know Phil's going to have a better chance at recalling this biblical verse, but the concept of where we start calling evil good, and that's going to happen out of these euphemisms, these words that we use to substitute with the concept of fetus, that's just Latin for baby. Abortion, that just concept of like aborting an operation, like yeah, exactly. So you're trying to sugarcoat what is in essence a detestable concept by just changing the terminologies, and you're going to find out that's the big secret that the world uses in trying is in the redefinition of terms, where they're going to separate a concept out and then eventually call that good, even though it's still rooted in that original bad, or as Christians would definitely call it evil.
They're trying to desensitize a human thought. You know, just because you're doing, that word, that's okay. I agree. Yeah.
If anybody's ever read 1984, you will definitely understand the concept of newspeak, where no words hold to their original meanings. All right, so I wanted to run through this quick. So this is, has anybody, well, let me just ask anybody, does anybody want to go through the concept of what human life is, especially, more to the point, the development of a human embryo and its resultant abortifactive measures, meaning, like, actually I want to go through this. This builds up an argument, so take it back. I'm trying to speed up here, but you guys typically are very patient, so I usually go for it. What's that? So what I wanted to talk about is, this is a cumulative case here. So we're going to be talking about the viability of human development in the womb as the embryo develops from fertilization. This is going to work in two measures: in pushing back against the arguments that the pro-choice camp will state about human viability, and that conferring the concept of personhood, and then also being able to show that and demonstrate the horrible evils that are performed in the abortions that are common through the baby's development. So in 8 weeks, the preborn baby's hands and feet are developing, and the neural pathways in her brain start to form. The child is constantly moving in the womb, although the mother cannot feel it. At 9 weeks, the child can suck her thumb, open and close her jaw, stretch, and sigh. The baby's teeth begin to form, and the heart completes dividing into 4 chambers. 10 weeks, the child's vital organs have developed and started to function. The baby is rapidly moving in the uterus, and the tiny nails begin to form in the child's hands and feet. At 12 weeks, the child develops reflexes and can open and close fingers, respond to touch, and make movements with his or her mouth. The child's nerve cells are developing rapidly. And so we get this picture of this embryo, this young life in the uterus. Now we switch over. So that was the first trimester development, and the abortion industry will, at that point in time, administer an abortion pill to handle that pregnancy. So a medical or chemical abortion is a non-surgical form of abortion which the woman takes pills containing mifepristone and misoprostol to end the life of the baby, or they'll use a suction method or aspiration. It's a DNC abortion, which takes a suction catheter, inserts it in the mother's uterus to extract the preborn baby. The tools are then used to scrape the lining of the uterus to remove any remaining parts. It's not a very pretty picture, and I know there's a lot of literature out there that actually shows.
Did you send everybody, Thomas, that woman's right to know that I sent you that?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't.
Because I mean, it describes in full detail. It's very good.
Yeah, you know I do put together the emails following the class. I'll put that in there.
Okay, please do, because that is from the state, and that any woman, well, of course, like I said, things are kind of in suspension, but any woman, before they would get an abortion, that book is given to them. It's, the state says you will give this woman this book so that they know what they're.
Yeah, and some states that'd be considered illegal to do, just to hand that information
Just to
out.
hand that out, and I remember, you don't have to hand that out to me, I remember when I was younger, definitely before I was married, that one of the biggest problems was self-aborting or assisted aborting with hangers.
Yeah, we're going to cover the illegal
Out
abortion.
in the alleys or what have you. So I can just imagine that scraping, what it did to the child and to the mother.
Yeah, that's actually something very sad to get into, is how abortions were handled back even before Roe v. Wade was in place. It was the pro-abortion can't turn that into a powerful argument for the legalization of abortion, but it's like it's just like calling for a more humane way to kill.
That's it. That's what really brought the whole thing about.
Yeah. So I mean, we have powerful arguments going against the death penalty these days. We don't draw and quarter people anymore. We don't crucify people anymore. We don't impale people anymore. But now we have very clean and efficient ways of taking people's lives. But I don't see how that doesn't still remove the premises that we're taking life. That is within the concept of abortion.
It tells you what we have resorted to doing, although we're doing it differently now, but it's still the same thing.
Yeah, and there's a history behind that I want to get into, especially when we touch into the theological portion of this, but I'm going to, no, you're fine. I want to definitely get us moving here. So on the second trimester, 13 weeks, the preborn baby's fingertips are visible, and the child's organs are visible through his or her thin skin. At 16 weeks, the child's toenails begin to form, and his or her face and limbs are much more developed. The baby's heart is pumping roughly 25 quarts of blood every day, and will continue as the child develops in the womb. At 20 weeks, the child's nervous system is developed enough to feel pain. Skip over that part. The baby is roughly, 24 weeks, the baby is roughly a foot long, and his or her brain is developing rapidly. The child's lungs are also developing into their branch-like structure. At this age, almost all babies can survive outside of their mother if given proper support. And then we're going to be talking about the concept of viability later. But now, in the second trimester, abortion is handled in what's called a dilation and evacuation abortion, where a surgical abortion procedure during which an abortionist first dilates the woman's cervix and then uses instruments to dismember and extract the baby from the uterus. So that's dismembering a fully developed nervous system, so the baby is aware of the pain at that stage. So into the third trimester, 25 weeks, a preborn child is fully developed and considered viable. That is, with proper medical care and attention, he or she would be able to survive outside the womb. While the medical staff is required to provide life-saving care to a child who survives an abortion procedure, it is unlikely that doctors and hospitals will take intensive measures to rescue a baby if it is born alive following an abortion procedure. So at 25 weeks, a newborn child is fully developed and considered viable, meaning it would likely survive outside of the womb if it were born. The baby's hair continues to grow and the color and texture can be discerned. At this stage, the child is around 13.5 inches long from the baby's head to its heels. At 27 weeks, the child's brain tissue continues to develop, and the baby is sleeping and waking in regular cycles. The mother may even feel the child hiccup at this stage, which may become more common as the pregnancy progresses. And at 31 weeks, the baby can turn his or her head to the side and is very active in the womb. The baby kicks and does somersaults and develops more fat underneath the skin. So this, I think this is supposed to be third trimester abortion. So a third trimester induction abortion is performed at 25 weeks to term. The abortionist will usually first kill the baby in utero by injecting a substance that causes cardiac arrest, and it induces the mother's labor to deliver her baby stillborn. So that's the concept of modern execution these days is first the injection of a sedative, basically something similar that you would give a surgery patient, and then the injection of a chemical, typically some sort of potassium-based chemical that will stop the heart. And this is the exact same thing minus the sedative that we give the baby at that point in time.
Minus the reason why you killed them in the first place.
True. So the biggest thing you're going to get in pushback from people who support abortion are always going to be these hard cases. What about rape? What if the woman's life is in danger? Or if there's poor prenatal diagnosis? When these be good reasons to justify the abortion, these prenatal diagnoses are stuff like the baby is shown to have Down syndrome, may develop a congenital disorder, or probably already exhibits a congenital disorder. So at that point in time, a lot of people elect to abort their babies, unfortunately. So, but when considering the hard cases, it's helpful at first to consider one, that they shouldn't be very hard. If a mother decided to have an abortion because she is pregnant with a girl child and wants a boy child, isn't it obviously that it's wrong to kill a girl simply because of her sex? And indeed, we can readily come to that conclusion because human rights are not grounded in a person's sex, they're grounded in one's humanity. And that's something interesting. Has anybody heard of the one-child policy in China?
Yes.
So we have had, due to cultural preferences of boys being providers for the families, especially after the parents retire, there has been an exorbitant amount of abortion of female embryos, babies in China, so much so that there is a sex imbalance in China that has basically left many men and millions unable to find a wife and unable to marry, and in many cases where there's a huge amount of illegal sex trafficking from other countries bringing in women to China to be able to basically be something of a Chinese concept of mail order bride, but not transactional in the way that we would have like in the West. So to continue with the argument, therefore it is even in excruciatingly challenging situations such as rape or incest, the human rights of preborn humans are just as valid. I'm not reading that right. The right to life cannot be revoked simply because the child's biological father is a rapist. And the best argument, very simple argument for that, is why punish the child for the crimes of his father? You know, if Albus were to go out and commit a mass murder, which I know he'll probably never do. I don't know, you kind of look shifty over there. Just kidding. They wouldn't go and take out all of your children and grandchildren. It just doesn't seem to fit in any concept of justice in the modern world. And in some, I would say, in some societies that would have been something that would have been done. Maybe Hebrew. What?
Ancient Hebrew.
Oh no, not like ancient Near East, but even modern concepts of like, say if you happen to be nobility and you usurp the king and then you would go off and kill every single one of his offspring.
Oh, it happened with I forget his name. But whenever they were ordered not to take anything from their conquered people, and he ended up taking something, and not only got him, but they got his entire family.
Oh yeah. I'm trying to remember that was off of.
That was David.
Yeah.
Brought back the king and saved the prize bulls and everything he wanted when God had told him.
No, it was a different guy.
It was a different guy. Achan in the Battle of Ai.
Joshua.
Yeah, Achan in the Battle of Ai. I know that one for sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was definitely the
But
concept
that
of
was
generational curses.
But that was authorized by higher authority.
Yeah, exactly. So, yes, that's something we were actually going to touch into down the road on this presentation. Is there are some theological pushbacks we're going to get from our fellow Christians, quote unquote Christians, who will actually defend the women's right to choose. If well, I want to use that euphemism, which I don't, but actually trying to find some way to justify abortion and try to remain, in their eyes, Orthodox Christians. All right, so. And we already covered that. That's the thing. Why do I make these slides? We just naturally talk these things through.
You could put your subjects up there. We'll talk about it.
I've actually thought about doing that. I always worry that I'm going to get up and like, what the heck was I going to talk about now? I can rip off this stuff for hours, but
You
might
can
not
turn
be
that
what I
off
want
and you go off of this.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the only argument that I've seen people say is like the idea of you being compassionate to the woman, that they are having to carry this remnant of their traumatic experience, and then the concept of the child that will end up being raised potentially with the knowledge that they are from a rape. But that is, I would say, more of an issue in how we deal with trauma in this world, rather than just try to use that as justification, because there's how many other things do we have where, say somebody suffers from a trauma, and thus and therefore you have this wildly imbalanced way of trying to cover for this trauma. Like the only other way you have is in old barbaric societies where you have an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. Kind of like calling it Hebrew barbaric. But that actually was an early law code, but I would say something more like unbalanced, like say somebody suffered a trauma, and then thus and therefore you were allowed to go kill all of their family, or something of that nature. But something wildly imbalanced, like somebody insulted you, so you have the right to go kill them, or something. You see the kind of concept. But that would be a very small trauma, an insult, depending on the person, I would say. There's some people who consider that trauma. So, if the pregnant woman's life is in danger, is abortion justified? I would. This is due to the Dublin Declaration, which states that abortion is never medically necessary to save a woman's life. The Dublin Declaration has 1,000 signatures from obstetricians, neonatologists, pediatricians, midwives, and other medical professionals, which states the following: as experienced practitioners and researchers in obstetrics and gynecology, we affirm that direct abortion, the purposeful destruction of the unborn child, is not medically necessary to save the life of a woman. We uphold that there is a fundamental difference between an abortion and necessary medical treatments that are carried out to save the life of the mother, even if such treatment results in the loss of life of her unborn child. We confirm that the prohibition of abortion does not affect in any way the availability of optimal care to pregnant women.
You lost me. I don't know what that one is.
That was slide 36.
36?
Yeah.
Okay.
And we have, we're only a third of the way in, but we're doing good. So, this is reinforced by the testimony of former abortionist Dr. Anthony Levantino, who describes the typical life of the mother case. I was in faculty at the hospital for 9 years, and I saw hundreds of cases of really severe pregnancy and complications, cancers, heart disease, intractable diabetes out of control, toxemia of pregnancy out of control, and in those 9 years, I saved hundreds of women from life-threatening pregnancies. And I did this by delivering them, by ending their pregnancy by delivery, either by induction of labor or cesarean section, delivering the baby. And I always tell people, in all those years, the number of babies that I was obligated to deliberately kill in this process was 0, none. So in other words, when a life-endanger medical condition arises, the solution is not to directly kill the baby, but to address the woman's medical situation. So this is we've heard of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but this is throwing the baby out with the common cold. So we pushbacks against this case of aborting a baby and instances of threat to the mother's life. So we have the ability to induce labor and or delivery of a premature child. There are some cases when a woman's health crisis may result in the premature delivery of the child. In the case of amnionitis, when the membranes are infected, or the amniotic membranes infected, an ethical solution is inducing labor to eliminate the infected membrane, an infection that otherwise could kill the mother and child. So there's other options available on the table. It's not just abort the baby. These interventions are very different from abortion because abortion targets the baby's body to destroy the child as opposed to addressing a medical condition and trying to save both lives. Granted, if the preborn child is younger than the age of viability, she may not survive, but this is not an abortion, the direct intentional killing of the preborn child. So if the difference is if the baby dies in an earnest attempt to try to save both the mother and the baby, then that is, we could say God's will as Christians, but we can also say that it's just the nature of medical care. Yeah, people die from, if anybody's gone under any medical procedure where they've been put under, they've all had to sign release forms and have been warned that there is an inherent risk of the surgery, yes.
You might die. Oh, that's scary. I remember I had some wisdom tooth, and he had to tell me that, you might die from this procedure. I said, well, don't do it. I said, no, you need to have a
Well, did you tell him to come with me? Yeah. I got that same warning when I got my wisdom teeth. And I said, Doc, you can come in through the mouth, not through. No funny joke.
Yeah, I hear you. Oh, yeah.
So, in instances of tubular ectopic pregnancies, this is where an embryo has implanted in the fallopian tube instead of the uterus. An ethical solution is to remove the mother's fallopian tube, although through a procedure called salpingectomy. Salpingectomy, if I'm pronouncing that wrong. And once again, we have Dr. Anthony Levantino stating that the procedure is not an abortion which directly kills the child. Ectopic pregnancies are life-threatening. Treating an ectopic pregnancy is not an abortion. It's saving that woman's life. It's that simple. So so I do see a little bit of gray zone here that people may push back. So this is a location thing. At the point, I don't know if we have the medical technology right now to move an ectopic or tubal pregnancy into the uterus. So at that point in time, that would be considered an unviable embryo. And there are just some ethical, I wish I was going to put a graphic in here to be able to communicate this out, but there are just some ethical situations where you have no good outcome. Typically, if you ever take an ethics class, I don't know if you haven't done that, they typically give you this concept of the trolley problem. A trolley is coming down and there's a juncture in the track, and on one side you've got a track workman working on the track, and on the other side you've got a bus full of children or something of that nature, and you have the ability to switch the track. Which choice do you take? Well, there's really no good choice, but you have to make some sort of a rationale based on those two not good outcomes, and that's sometimes where we as Christians have to, and anybody really has to wrestle with what would be either the best possible outcome or what would be, in many instances, the lesser of two evils to contend with. And unfortunately,
as long as if that happens, there's no way the child will be nourished. I mean, it's just. That's just it. It's just.
Yeah.
It's not gonna.
No way the placenta's gonna develop. No way it'll be.
There's no attaching in the uterus where nourishment will take place. Yeah. So it's just has ended up in the wrong place. And there's.
Unfortunately, yes. So this is a very difficult.
It's difficult for the mother, but just.
But these are the hard cases that we have to argue with and dealing. And then this is a totally different way of handling the situation at that point. Then you go wrong.
But at that point, would you still call this abortion?
No, you couldn't, because you're not a fallopian, an ectopic or a tubal pregnancy cannot develop a viable baby. So you're not aborting something that is not already going to develop. Yeah. So, and this is something that you're always going to be pressed against people you're going to be debating with, is, and you have to learn how to see it happening. There's these false dilemmas happening. So there's always a this or that argument. And this is titled under Beware of False Dilemmas. It's important to note that sometimes abortion advocates may claim a mother's life is in danger when in fact it isn't. Consider the heartbreaking case of a 10-year-old girl in Paraguay whose pregnancy from rape made international news in 2015. Although she was advanced in a pregnancy when it was discovered, 21 weeks along, some abortion supporters claimed the abortion was necessary to save the pregnant girl's life. And as the pregnancy progressed to 26 weeks, some still insisted on an abortion. However, whether by abortion or birth, either way, the preborn child would need to eventually come out of the young mother's body. Why should the removal by abortion be the response instead of delivering the baby, even if early? So we still have the options of cesarean section at some point in time or an induced labor, but this is something well, I'm going to continue with this. Okay, I'll just read through this real quick. In this case, the Paraguayan government doctors countered that the girl's life was not actually in danger. They pointed out that she received checkups, was having a normal pregnancy, and was receiving care in a shelter. Even if her young body would not be able to sustain maintaining a pregnancy to 40 weeks, delivering the viable fetus via induction of labor at the required time or through a cesarean section could result in a live birth, no abortion necessary. Eventually, the young mom delivered a healthy 6-pound baby girl via C-section. But this is in the abortion argument and in most other apologetical and any argument you ever get into, you're always going to have this kind of whataboutism, the argument out of exceptions. And this is something you're always going to have to look out for. And you have to, in some ways, either learn your argument so concisely that you can define it, or learn how to defend against all these exceptions. And these exceptions can be like a death of 1,000 cuts in a way. But if we have first a very good grounding idea of what a person is and what a good grounding in ethics, it's something that should be a challenge to us. But this is something we're still going to cover most of these common exceptions.
So nobody looked at it as though having an abortion, doing an abortion procedure on a 10-year-old girl was destructive, harmful to the child.
Well,
the view was, so all these people who were they're wanting to put a girl who's 10 years old, who's already been raped, through a traumatic experience like an abortion.
Counter one traumatic experience with yet another.
Yes, compounding. And that's, the traumatic experience of an abortion.
Well, it's just the question about the traumatic experience, the traumatic physical experience, because the birth process takes care of the hormones and what have you. Well, when you do an abortion, you have interrupted all of those hormones, so you are actually doing harm to the female body. It can result in the woman not being able to have children. And one of the things that they're not really talking about, because they'll squelch this, there is even a link, although they will deny, to breast cancer and to other cancers because of the hormones not getting to do their natural thing. And this is the one thing, that we have in our training and in that book that I want you to send everybody. The left will tell you, oh, no. But research is there that there are several cancers that women can be subject to who've had abortions.
Yeah, and also you can argue that this doesn't even actually deal with the original trauma. You're dealing with the result of the trauma, but you're not actually contending with the trauma in and of itself.
So you have physical trauma that even though they don't realize.
Well, we're talking about this girl was raped.
She's had rape. She's now, it's not a good situation.
No,
the thing is, neither is the abortion.
Exactly.
And then the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual trauma that woman goes through, even though she's going to deny it for a while, at some point, she has to deal with that.
Exactly. So why not deal with the actual trauma of the rape itself rather than trying to counter it?
And I'm talking about just any abortion. Just any abortion.
Well, this is something you're going to be running into is advocates for whatever position, in this case, abortion, are always going to look for these sensational exception cases. And these are highly rare. but they make for good arguments. But they're not
They
as
may be
solid.
becoming-
They're sensational in that they can pull people's heartstrings, that they can argue, okay, see, your case, what you're saying isn't right because we have this over here and this doesn't adhere to your argumentation.
And what is so sad is we've got this catch-22 going on now. You know, if you think about where we are in the world with smuggling, the human smuggling. What did they announce on the news today? That 85,000 kids are now missing. They don't know that once they came to the United States. Well, you know, it's been the left saying, oh, they're coming here for a better life. No, they're not. They're being smuggled so they can go into trafficking. So then, here you are, you've got this feeding ground for very young girls that are probably getting pregnant because they're being trafficked.
Yeah.
Because of policies that's allowing human smuggling.
Yeah, and there's a circular argument in there.
It's a horrible thing.
Well, there's a whole cycle with human smuggling. Usually tends to have these young ladies end up into the sex industry, whether it be prostitution or porn. They get pregnant, and then they're put into the abortion industry to have to be able to keep them within their whatever their usefulness, whatever the people who are trafficking them have to get out of them. So yeah, it's just a cycle of depravity. That's exactly what it is.
Oh, and then as a man, you can get pregnant at any time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know what you're identifying as now there.
Don't make me tell them your secret.
Yeah, right.
Um,
Now you gotta cut.
They put the wrong sex on Farrell's birth certificate, so technically he was Farrell Ray Cox.
Who did that?
Female.
Yeah, they called me a
And they did figure it out until they went to the Marines.
Is it Marine
Spent 24 years, yeah. And he had to have a extended medical.
Yeah, though the guy was like, well, we gotta make sure. And I was like, really? He's like, you're just the government, man. Yeah, this doctor was like,
I thought they did that to everybody.
Right.
no, they even gave me a notice. What was funny was I actually found out when I was 18 because I had to I had to go down to the post office and file for the draft. And that's whenever they're like, women don't have to register for the draft. Like,
And you can imagine he was the son.
Yeah, I was like, well, this is odd. I was like, what? And so I had to take that same birth certificate because I never got it changed. It's still that way to this day. So so they took that in there and they go, well, we have to look. And I was like, all right, man, whatever. All right, doc.
Sorry to derail. I do have.
No, I know. I'm remembering my insurance process in the military. They did that to everybody.
Yeah, no, this guy had to document it.
Yeah.
That I wasn't female, that no ulterior surgeries have been done, altering surgeries have been done.
Oh, okay, I see what I'm saying.
Yeah, so we had to.
All right. Yeah, this is.
I would have went to Paris.
I do have a question about arguing the exception, Thomas.
Go ahead.
Like how, because it happens, right? And it's like, what about rape? What about incest? What about something traumatic? And staying up on the stats, I feel like the last time I heard it was like 97% of abortions are used as birth. Like,
Yeah, there's just for the mother doesn't want to have a child.
had to have a child.
Yeah.
Choice.
Yeah. Do we know those? Like, do you know those current? I just
The
haven't.
stats, I don't know if I got them down on these, but I'm pretty sure that Beverly probably has access to them. But yeah, it's something
We can
minuscule.
find out. It's a very
It's
small.
highly minuscule for
Less than
from one rape
1%.
incest.
It's
Less than 1% of all abortions are due to these
exceptions.
these exceptional instances. I forget what they call them. There's another word they use, not an exception, but anyways.
Outliers.
Whatever you want to call, like from rape or incest, and then congenital defects,
Extenuating.
risk of the mother. I'm sorry.
The average age
Of
of women who.
if I do remember correctly, it was within their mid to late 20s.
Which is honest, I believe that's wrong. They don't have to document or report the ones where, what gets me is these girls get raped, go in, they have abortion, or they're 13, 14 years old in relationships with grown men. And of course that doesn't get recorded. This man gets to keep on being a predator
the abortions are like the 20s, starting in at about, I'm trying to remember because I know there is an exact stat on that, but it's mainly that what you would consider the college age up to say close to 30, and maybe even encompassing early 30, but it's that demographic right in there.
And yeah, and just like because people argue the exception, there's countries like Iceland who decided that Down syndrome was a grand exception, and now they're 100% Down syndrome child free because they now the law is being for any child that's found to have Down syndrome.
Yeah.
Like that's the added, right? Like this is what happens if you let someone argue the exception.
Yeah. And in this concept,
And it makes
what makes for the flourishing and the well-being of a viable human life, you know, and then that can be a sliding scale just based on changing the definitions very easily. So yeah, you creep into different categories, but that's the argumentation that if you ever want to have a concept that we consider as good, you know, like a solid concept, all you have to do is chip away, find an exception to that rule, and then make that exception the focal point of your activism against whatever you're railing against. In this case, obviously abortion, but I'm trying to teach more of a general principle that you all can apply to almost any issue. Any issue. But yeah, this is just to that's why I'm pretty much going to flip this class over into a cultural apologetics class when we get done with the 10 weeks, so then we can get into the philosophy and theories that run all of these lines of argumentation that leads up to the idea of these exception cases. But so now we're back into human rights here. So the right of liberty doesn't give us a license to harm other human beings. I just want to leave that one there because we can read through that in more detail, but we need to move on. So we want to deal with the issue of bodily rights. So parents have a certain set of obligations to their children, and since parents have a responsibility to meet these basic needs of their offspring after birth, it follows that they have the same duty before birth. Donating one's uterus for a preborn child is equivalent to using one's body after birth to feed, birth, change, hold, and seek shelter for a born child, even if fathers who had no knowledge of that child's existence during the pregnancy can be expected to pay child support for 18 years, which is an interesting dichotomy. But the argument that you'll have is the concept of viability. You know, at what point in time is this baby viable to live outside the womb? Well, it can be viable to live, but without care of anybody else, even a fully developed child will die on their own if not fed. Babies don't know how to take care of themselves in the way adults do. In fact, one can even argue most adults can survive on their own outside of society. So in what way can we make that argument viable as a human being that doesn't require the nurturing support of another human life? And but this is the argument: is once the baby's born, the mother is still responsible for the baby, whether through breastfeeding or other measures. But yeah, it's not a good.
And sometimes we kind of think about little animals.
Mm-hmm.
We had this cat that my daughter got and didn't know if it was pregnant or not. So it was like, okay, I have to take it to the vet, and if she is pregnant, it's going to cost more, which is not the issue. But I was trying to find out if they would even do the spaying if she was pregnant. So as I'm reading, it's talking about all these different ethical considerations by veterinarians that a lot of them, if an animal is pregnant, will not do the spaying because they don't want to kill these little ones that couldn't live anyway.
Yeah.
So there will be that ethical concern about an animal, but it seems that they don't bat an eye.
Yeah. I would say the animal rights these days are held in a much higher esteem.
If they wanted to, here's long and short. If they wanted to end an abortion, they could have done it any number of ways decades ago. They didn't want to. We have too many politicians that need to have the needle.
Yeah, well,
But it would have been,
what Beverly was
It's
saying,
a
though,
lucrative business.
it confers something important. So you could get years in prison for killing a bald eagle egg, for destroying a bald eagle egg. It's an unborn embryo, but you're heralded and celebrated in many circles if you kill a human being. But in what way is that embryo? And we're talking about people when they're pets. They're almost conferred on higher rights than humans in these days. Like,
Absolutely.
yeah, you see it on the news people who abuse a dog, but then what about all the rampant child abuse we run into? Which is another argument that people, the abortionists throw, that what if this baby's going to be born into an abusive family situation, but then why then not handle the abusive family situation rather than human life? But, I'm going to push this a little bit ahead. This is basically here talking about how if children, because they're dependent, weak, and vulnerable, need to have their basic needs met. And the UN declares that human rights of the child by reason of physical and mental maturity, needs special safeguards and care, including appropriate legal protection before as well as after birth. I mean, I don't know. That's kind of an interesting concept that we would not confer these human rights on a baby that would be on an unborn baby that we would on a natural born baby. So it's once again that interesting concept of personhood that we're going to have to deal with. So, but then there's the argument that it's always the woman's right to choose. This is something that one of the biggest. It's almost like a knee-jerk reaction when you're going to be evoking arguments against abortion. That no matter what the situation, whether it be one of these exceptions or even just an inconvenient pregnancy, and who are you as a man or anyone else to try to challenge a woman's right to choose? But if a woman wants to choose abortion, is it best to make abortion legal, because we have to deal with this concept of illegal abortions, these back alley abortions that we were alluding to, the scraping of embryos out of the mother's womb by crude instruments, which probably still has not stopped even after the. I know there's actually figures out there which I'm regrettably ignorant of right now that can hold to the concept of still abortions that happen outside of abortion clinics, but the argument that we would have to push back against the concept of if abortion were made illegal, that this would fall back into unsafe practices is first, abortion is never safe for preborn humans. It dismembers, suctions, or poisons them to death. That's always one picture that they always remove, is the concept of that unborn baby. And then second, even if an argument could be made that legal abortion is safer for the woman, if abortion ends an innocent human being's life, it ends a human being's life, then it isn't ethical to legalize killing in order to make it supposedly safer for those who are participating in it. And third, abortion, whether legal or illegal, carries the risks of negative effects on the woman's health, that we talked about. I'll leave it what Beverly talked about earlier. Fourth, the number of women who died from illegal abortions prior to Roe versus Wade in 1973 was greatly inflated by those lobbying for the legalization of abortion. And not to sound conspiratorial, although I know it's made the news on how COVID deaths were skewed from medical reporting over the last few years.
It's because the guy who was decapitated in the car wreck had COVID.
Yeah, exactly. The guy that died by firing squad had COVID too.
Yeah, it was COVID death by firing squad.
Yeah. All right, I'm just going to skip past because we're.
All this talk about women being not protected during an abortion.
Go ahead.
What is that?
What do you mean? What is that?
What is it?
Oh yeah. Okay, Matt Walsh. We need to get back on the show when we're done. But yeah, I mean, but we're talking about still definitions there, even with that concept is the biggest concept of skewing of definitions in order to make. What? Yeah. Well,
Your birthday party.
yeah, but you're seeing where I'm talking about making an exception. That argument out of exceptions feeds that whole line of the transgender movement hugely. The idea that there's a few people that are intersex that may have altered chromosomal differences from what would be the norm, then you could just suddenly destroy the category of the gender binary just out of a few exceptions, so that same argument being placed wholesale within that whole movement. So yeah, that's amazing. I don't know if that was your original intention in that reference, just me pulling that out, but yes.
It was thinking.
No, I knew it was.
How do you argue against that?
What's that?
How do you argue against those with yourself?
That'll be something I would teach my next class, but you would basically have to say that there are some people who definitely have certain medical disorders, and you have to treat them on a case-by-case basis. But just because, like say, there is an exception to the rule doesn't break down the entire concept. So you have male and female, and you have somebody here who follows outside of what would be the norm. So, like say, for example, we would define humans as being bipedal, 2 arms, 2 legs. So then, would having somebody who was born without an arm then destroy the whole category of humanity?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly, because you're just the freak of nature there.
Yeah, right.
No, I don't mean that.
I was born with 6 fingers, but
yeah.
so therefore all gloves must be made.
Oh, so you were you were the guy that killed Indigo Montoya's dad.
I was.
Yeah.
I was the man with 6 fingers.
You Gen Xers get that one online.
Yeah, right. Well, didn't get that.
I'm learning a lot, so if I were to have this question.
We're just right in the middle.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Look, wait.
All right, so moving on. Okay, so talking about sacred keep abortion legal topic. Most fundamentally, however, civil societies do not legalize behavior that harms innocent children. We're on slide 56. Regardless of what risks may come to those who hurt children. In conclusion, since the preborn are human, and since humans have human rights, it follows that we ought to respect the preborn and protect them from abortion. This is just I didn't want to spend too much time because Beverly did such a wonderful, detailed analysis of what the dangers are in women that suffer from abortion, in lieu of, in contrast to those who go ahead and go to term and deliver the baby. Okay, so now we're going to be delving into the theological foundations, because one of the reasons I want to spend a large amount of time on this, well, first off, I want to ask a question. Do we all feel comfortable in our arguments against those who would hold to abortion being legal? Okay.
Now I do.
Do you? Anybody raise your hand, or do you think I would need to go back and cover some more ground? Okay, because the reason why I want to state this is there are actually growing numbers of people who profess to be Christian who think that abortion should be kept legal, either out of the concept of the freedom of choice for women, some who hold to a concept of that it was actually prescribed in the Bible. We're going to actually touch that one. It's actually an interesting topic. And some who just hold to a more worldly account as to what human life is. So, when I get into the theological aspect, and this is one of the classes we're going to be spending more time in the theology than the actual apologetic arguments, but the interesting thing is the theology and the apologetics, I don't think really were distinct in this case. So, regarding the history of Christianity, abortion, the question of the value of life inside the womb was really quite simple and direct. It didn't revolve around highly technical questions of when life and personhood began. Still, these early teachers of Christian orthodoxy had a very direct and irrefutable rationale. So, this is a little argument here. If abortion is needed to bring the death of a child, that child is considered to be living. If living, the child had to receive that gift of life from God, the giver of all life, and God is actively sustaining that new life in His goodness, even in the secret of the womb, as Psalm 139 teaches. Therefore, abortion is to be condemned because it rejects the goodness and sovereignty of God. So many biblical passages talk about God's value of life. However, we can also see in the history of Christianity and abortion that Christians have held this belief, inherited from their Jewish roots since the beginning. I'm not reading well, sorry about that. They also held it boldly and consistently. Therefore, let's examine some of the earliest Orthodox Christian sources outside of Scripture itself. But why I want to touch into this is the pushback against some of our people who hold to Christian beliefs but claim to to support abortion, that it's a modern, the anti-abortion movement's a modern Christian fundamentalist concept. That this is something that's been around since the beginning of the church, actually even beforehand. So, before the official canon of the New Testament was finally established, the early church drew from a rich array of writings from the apostles and other beloved and respected church leaders. These writings were widely circulated between local churches. Then they were studied, read aloud in Sunday morning services, and deeply valued by individual believers for instruction and encouragement in Christian discipleship. Essentially, this is a primary collection of teachings on the topic from early Christian church literature over the first 3 centuries. So we'll be talking about the Didache, or the teaching of the apostles. And this was a basic manual on proper Christian conduct for all believers. Although the date of its creation is not known exactly, it is increasingly considered a first-century document even before there was a New Testament. It was read universally across early churches, introduced to the reader, and received by believers with the authoritative title, The Lord's Teaching to the 12 disciples, the apostles to the nations. And concerning the value of earliest life, right there between charges to shun practicing witchcraft and never coveting your neighbor's goods, it commands, you shall not murder a child by abortion, nor kill that which is born. And those who do so are judged, murderers of children, destroyers of the handiwork of God. And the interesting thing is they have to deal with this concept because in the Roman Empire, and even in the Greco-Roman world broadly, preceding it, abortion was handled because the medical technology was developed the way we have. To this day, most often the woman would go through term and then deliver the baby, and then they would take the baby and abandon it out in the woods. Some Greek records talk about actually casting the babies off of cliffs into the water, but typically just leaving the baby out. And there's some Spartan legends of the babies that would survive end up becoming grand warriors that could conquer all. But it was the concept of abortion is nothing new, and it was actually practiced in the ancient Near East during the Hebrew times. And you heard about the name Molech being dropped, and I think we're all familiar with that concept where in the Canaanite religions, the firstborn child was sacrificed to this god and actually burnt on an altar alive. So this wasn't by any means a new innovation in the modern era that we're dealing with modern medical technology. It's something that's been around since all of humanity has been around. So even though we are careful today in talking about abortion, the early Christians did not shrink from referring to abortion as murder, and they did so from the very beginning. To take the life of a child, born or preborn, was to interrupt God's loving care and sovereign purpose. This is why abortion is wrong for everyone, but the Didache is not the only early Christian teaching condemning abortion in Christianity. There are other rich sources, and we don't have a lot of time. Do you all want to hear some of the more early church sources, or do we want to?
Yes.
Okay, so 4th century apostolic constitutions, so we might be a little late getting out, so I just want to let you all know if we're going to continue with this. Just as the Didache teaches in its first line that there are 2 ways, one of life and one of death, and between the 2 ways there's a great difference, so does another important 4th century Christian manual. The apostolic constitutions, or constitutions of the holy apostles, help the readers understand the 2 ways, the way of life and the way of death. This document explains the former is from God and the latter of error, from the snares of the adversary. In section 3 of book 7, drawing from the expanding upon the earlier Didache, all Christians are authoritatively instructed, you shall not slay your child by causing abortion, nor kill that which is begotten, for everything that is shaped and has received a soul from God, if it be slain, shall be avenged, as being unjustly destroyed. And the reason why, one of the big reasons why I'm covering some of these early church documentation is in the Bible, a lot of people will state that it doesn't anywhere state no abortion. And they'll just say, thou shalt not kill as a tenuous extrapolation from the 10 Commandments to, once again, they're not viewing this unborn child as an actual human, so it's thus and therefore not murder. Early Christians consistently believed that not only was the preborn child created and cared for by God, but possessed a God-given soul. To take that life was to snuff out God's very personal, precious, and eternal gift. There was no debate about this fact whatsoever anywhere in the traditional Christian writings. And here. We have Clement of Alexandria, explains abortion in more than a child's life. Clement was a major theologian and teacher in the very early church. His 3-volume Pedagogus, the instructor or tutors it translates to, he offers Christ's instruction on how Christians should respond to the love of God. Clement explains that abortion is more than just the death of a child created by God's providence. It is also the death of the feelings of those who are involved in it. Our whole life can go on in an observation of the laws of nature. If we gain dominion over our desires from the beginning, and if we do not kill by various means of a perverse art, the human offspring, born according to the designs of divine providence, for these women who, in order to hide their immorality, use abortive drugs which expel the child completely dead, abort at the same time their own human feelings. That is something, as I've always found, one of the most compelling issues, and this is something I'm going to touch upon in the conclusion. So remember this statement from Clement here. So Tertullian, concerning the soul of the preborn, his teachings on the ethics of abortion were strong, and his apology, which he addressed to the provincial governors of the Roman Empire, where we also find the famous quote, "The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church," Tertullian gives us one of the most beautiful pro-life statements in the history of the church. He states, "In our case, murder being once for all forbidden, we may not destroy even the fetus in the womb. While as yet the human being derives blood from the mother's body to make a new creature. Prevention of birth is premature murder, nor does it matter whether you take away a life that is born or destroy one that is coming to the birth. The future person is a person already. You have the fruit already in its seed." And that is, I love this statement, you have the fruit already in its seed. That's the concept of what is the purpose of a seed? So what's the purpose of an acorn? It's to become an oak tree, right? So we have a concept in these days that's gone by, this concept of telos, an ingrained purpose, its actual ends, its means, what it is to be, and it is inherent in it at its inception, at its concept, even beforehand, the distinction of humanity. An acorn is an oak tree by its ends, by what its actual telos is. So it's a good concept to get in your head, the conception between embryo and fully grown human. But this is also a pushback, in that a pushback to pushback, and the people will say that the Bible isn't clear on abortion. But if the early church fathers, who were instructed by the apostles, found high clarity in the concepts of abortion and the Bible's injunctions against it, I would say that we have a very good, strong argumentation. It just people aren't wanting to do their homework, I would say.
Well, the reason the Bible may not actually state abortion is murder is because that concept of murder included abortion to the first century audience.
Yeah, I would say so. That's another interesting aspect of arguments of exception. So, it's not really a murder if this is an exception to the rule. Insert here, and then you're able to draw a distinction and start making something separate. So this is good. This is once again taking something evil and beginning to call it good, and that's
Isaiah 5:20.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so this is going to be a constant theme that we're going to be dealing with in our apologetics.
And I think the point you made that if this is not alive, why is it necessary to kill it?
Good point. Yeah.
Because like the abortion pill, the first one cuts off the hormones that nourish
And also
that little baby.
activate the certain what do we call it, developmental cycles within the fetus.
So it's the baby. Once that first pill is taken, it cuts off the nourishment.
Yeah.
And it can be reversed if in a certain number of hours. If a woman changes her mind, there is now a pill she can take to reverse that. So, there's still a little window of hope there. Now, what she takes, the second pill, assuming that baby, or that little bitty tiny baby, them dead from malnourishment. Then the second pill causes the mother to expel that teensy little fetus.
Are miscarriages kind of hard on women?
I don't have all the answers that you have to ask something, but I think that probably there's something that is going on in that woman's body different than an abortion. And I can't.
Well, no, I'm just saying those that aren't a miscarriage is also hard on a woman.
Well,
I would imagine. I mean, that would be a
harder on her mental and.
I'm sure.
Then,
But no, I'm just saying those that any time a pregnancy is ended all of a sudden. But here's the thing that I'm not seeing in any of these early church fathers stating. I haven't looked ahead, but the most important thing to understand about all of this is that we are image bearers of God.
I'm going to touch into that.
Yeah,
but that's as you were saying, that was a given. That didn't have to be explained to a first century Christian. That was inherent. It's like saying, "Oh, well, Harold, did you remember to breathe today?"
Yeah.
Something. Yeah. So.
And the reason I brought that up is because in Proverbs, the 6th chapter, it talks about, that's as far as like things the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination. The third thing that the Lord hates is the shedding of innocent blood.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it bleeds,
Yeah, but then.
I mean, only that, but that it says the blood is the life source. So.
Yeah, I 100% agree that does apply 100% to abortion. But whenever you have unclear distinction, like an absolute, like, this exactly is what we're talking about. Like, there can be no other possible interpretations out of it. You're always going to have people arguing exceptions or arguing that that's not quite the interpretation. It's meant to be so and so forth. It's a really great foundation. I 100% agree with it. It is, because then you're going to have to defend in terms of innocent. Is this an innocent person? And that's where we're going to have to be dealing with those argumentations. But that's a very good theological justification. I do thank you for that. But there's one key point that I think that we fell back into, and as I was listening to Beverly talking. Beverly, I want to thank you for coming here and bringing your wonderful insight. But it was talking about earlier, because I forgot about it, and I meant to talk about this earlier. We're going to get pushed back that the woman has a right to choose, right? And this is for us men here, especially. What we're going to get is an immediate pushback that who are we as men to dictate what a woman has the right to do with her own body? And that is basically stating that somebody has no moral authority just due to the fact of who they are. And I want to, in a way, I'm kind of promoting the next class, but also want to set up what is a concept that we're dealing with in the modern world. It's called standpoint epistemology. It's like you don't have my lived experiences, so who are you to tell me what my truth is? Or who are you to dictate or to explain to me what my actual, these lived experiences are? And there's I wanted to definitely pop it up in the class, but I don't know if anybody saw a recent interview where Vivek and Ramaswamy had with Don Lemon on CNN, where he basically pulled that argument out on the internet. I think it led up to a lot of the issues that have currently come up with his dismissal from the network. But it is something I want to warn you all about. You're, as men, going to run into this immediately. It's going to be a wall thrown at you in a later class, because I don't have time to cover how to handle standpoint epistemology and abortion.
Nobody's telling these women what to do with their liver or their kidney.
Yeah, but you're still not dealing with the argument in that way. That's what I'm trying to say. I mean, you're right, but they're going to throw it at you as you as a man have no place, no right, no ethical standpoint to argue against that.
But because I'm a human being, I don't have to.
But you're a man. The distinction is drawn there.
What's a man?
Oh, you know him?
That's once again. You're throwing in a red herring.
Oh, straight.
Well, I know. It's good to just disrail the argument, but it could get you on another track that you may have to prepare for. That's what I'm trying to say. Watch out for the red herrings. They can be used against you as much as you can use them against somebody else.
Yes.
It is.
They're using it for birth control. Abortion is the new birth control.
I'd agree.
So,
Too late. You gotta do that
so
before.
what do you say? Women are too lazy
What
to take care of whatever it is we're going to do.
is
So
birth
they're
control
gonna
other than a euphemism for just, it would be like a pre-abortion in a way. And most of them have, what do they do? Like if it's something that disrupts the woman's menstrual cycle, you know, you're disrupting the I'm losing the word here. The actual necessary processes, the
Biological processes.
Well, anyway, the biological processes. There's another term that I'm looking for. It's eluding me right now. But I don't know. That's another whole argument that we're going to get into is the concept of birth control in Christians too. But that's also another line of argumentation you're going to run into is what point does this birth control and abortion
Well, and
right to
that's
draw
one
the
of the things
distinction?
that, here is that, looking for somebody right now to really be a effective good teacher on natural, because of the way a woman's body is made, and each woman's body is so unique, and she really understands her body.
Yeah. Well, but then that can also feed into that standpoint epistemology stuff too, which we have. That's why I want to get into that in a little more detail down the line. I'm skipping through a lot of the church fathers. You have the handouts, and I'll forward the slides too. So if you all want to dig in a little bit further, in fact, I gave you the sources where I paraphrased what was basically the tip of the iceberg on that. But I wanted to get into this interesting concept of is it possible to be Christian and pro-choice? Because you are going to run into this with.
No.
Well, yeah, it's easy, but how did you defend that statement? And so.
What slide are you on?
We are on, sorry for that, 83 and 98, because yeah, we're running short on time. Okay, so as a Christian according to the Bible is someone who has accepted God's offer of forgiveness through Jesus' death and resurrection. Salvation is a gift of God through faith in the finished work of Jesus Christ. What we believe about other things is a matter of growth, not of salvation. However, 2 Corinthians 5:17 says, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. When we give our lives to Christ, he begins to change us, our ways of thinking and our ways of behaving. What did it say? I don't know what I cut off there. Okay. Let's just move on. So pro-choice advocates state that the Bible does not address abortion, so the decision should be the individual's. While it is true the term abortion does not appear in the Bible, the principles about the value of life are there. In Exodus 21:22-23, God wrote in his law protection for the unborn. If a pregnant woman was injured, causing her to lose her child, then the one who caused the injury was to be executed, a life for a life. The phrase a life for a life says a lot. God considered the life of the unborn just as valuable as that of a grown man. But some pro-choice advocates argue that they are not pro-abortion. They say they hate abortion, but support a woman's right to choose. This makes as much sense as saying that you personally hate rape, but support a man's right to commit it. The rhetoric sounds nice. The mention of choice makes it even more appealing. But underneath, it's a direct conflict with God's viewpoint in Scripture. And pro-choice advocates often state that their position is compassionate. This is a term that gets thrown out a lot. And that pro-lifers don't care about the woman or her child. This argument is a red herring. Whether pro-lifers care or not is irrelevant, just as it is irrelevant whether those opposed to robbery care about the banks being robbed. Robbery is against God's moral law, so is abortion, and that's the issue. And I ran into this when I was going through Bible college. Numbers 5:11-31, you'll get this thrown at you a lot. If anybody wants to bring that up in their Bible, I'll give them a minute. But there is an instance here, what's called the jealousy offering. So I'll just read this for you. This passage in Numbers 5:11-31 describes an unusual procedure, sometimes referred to as the jealousy offering. Others label it as the ordeal of the bitter water. An Israelite man who insisted his wife was unfaithful, but had no proof, could bring her to the tabernacle for this test. The ritual required an accusing husband to bring his wife to the priest. The priest would create a concoction of unpleasant but relatively benign ingredients. And I say this because you have Christians and even non-Christians throwing against you, saying it's biblical cause and justification for abortion. So, to continue, the wife would recite an oath and drink the mixture. Guilt was demonstrated if the woman's belly swelled and she became sick. If there was no such effect, her innocence was established. Conviction for adultery would be followed by a possible death sentence, as in Leviticus 20:10. Innocence meant clearing her name, putting away all suspicion. The woman would suffer no ill effects and will be able to have children, as stated in Numbers 5:28. So critics label this test a barbaric, superstitious ritual involving sorcery. Others suggest that it depicts abortion. Neither view is correct. While bizarre, the rite protected women from husbands who were overly aggressive or hasty in their judgment. It offered a safe outlet for male jealousy and it would have nearly always exonerated the woman in question. Many seemingly strange rules of the Old Testament help mediate a sinful fallen culture, and such is the case with the jealousy offering, or bitter water, or deal if you please. It provided a stopgap measure that people could reasonably be expected to follow. This parallels the Mosaic law's procedures for divorce, intended to prevent women from being easily abused or cast aside. And this would have been an easy justification in the ancient Near East. If you wanted to divorce your wife and you wanted to easy out, oh, she cheated on me. Oh, okay, then she just gets put to death, according to the law. And that is an interesting concept when you look at what women's rights were in the ancient Near East. They were basically considered property of their family and later property of their husbands, and could be killed or just divorced at the whim of the husband at the slightest infraction. So this actually afforded some measure of protection for the women and the wives of ancient Israel. And it wasn't a prescription for abortion within religious terms. So, we continue. There was nothing magical about the concoction the priest would make to determine guilt or innocence, nor would the listed ingredients naturally produce a swelling or severe illness. This implies a supernatural source for a guilty sign. In other words, for a woman to be exposed as blameworthy by the curse of this ritual, God would have to intervene and make the signs appear. This follows the perspective that adultery is fundamentally wrong as a sin against God, rather than simply an insult to the husband. It's also noteworthy that the process is heavy on symbolism and drama. Components such as temple dust, an offering, water, and the loosening of the hair is representative of ideas such as repentance, holiness, and submission. One purpose for these components is the psychological effect they have on the participants. Many ancient tests for innocence were structured in a similar way. So you remember Solomon's way of adjudicating two women claiming possession of the one baby. So a guilty conscience would be strained by fear, likely leading to a confession before the curse could be enacted. The rite was meant to exemplify the principle explained in Numbers 32:23. Be sure your sin will find you out. Some ancient Jewish commentators even believe the curse would affect the adulterous male as well. And those who claim the passage depicts abortion inserts concepts not even hinted at in the text, so there's a little bit of eisegesis there. Parts of this confusion stems from a 2011 edition of the NIV, which refers to miscarriage. Pregnancy is not part of the requirement for the ritual, nor is pregnancy mentioned anywhere in the process. The effects include some type of swelling and or shriveling, yet the targeted body part is vague. In fact, it's the same Hebrew term used to describe the spot where Jacob suffered his infamous injury in Genesis 32, as well as the place where Ehud hit his sword in Judges 3. At worst, Numbers 5 passage implies future infertility. The ritual was not a remedy for an unwanted pregnancy. It was a test for adultery. Traditional interpretations for the ritual even restricted it from being performed on pregnant women, as was done in the Mishnah Sotah. And in the ancient world, women were often afforded no rights of any kind. Merely being suspected of adultery was enough justification to be divorced, cast aside, and left destitute. A man who suspected his wife was unfaithful might batter or even murder her, or he might employ a pagan spell that would all but guarantee a guilty verdict. So the ritual in Numbers 5:11 through 31 is an allowance to human nature and to that cultural context, and it had the effect of greatly reducing the damage done to women. That's not an endorsement of jealousy or suspicion, nor does it include anything reasonably interpreted as an abortion. Unless God supernaturally intervened, the right described in Numbers 5 would declare a woman innocent by default. And I'd say that I wanted to rewrite this a bunch of times, but this is the conclusion. So the main point, abortion is not only the largest human rights atrocity in modern history, but it's also an affront to the sacredness of human life and the destruction of the concept of humans being image bearers of God. There could be no more egregious failure to love your neighbor as yourself, as the blight of abortion kills the closest possible neighborly relationship, that between mother and child, while destroying the concept of the self. And I was trying to say basically the concept of mother herself too, ends up being destroyed, the loss of her humanity in the process. So, does anybody have any questions?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Where you said in the Bible, someone who is accepted God's offer of
Slide, please.
Slide 83.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Is this going to be a soteriology question? Because if so, we'll save that for systematic theology. Is it?
Oh, yeah, it has something to do with that.
All right, we'll save that for systematic theology or talk later. Yeah. Okay, so the Holy Spirit, by irresistible grace, caused the person.
Much better. Why can't you write that?
What?
That's much better. Why can't you write that?
Honestly, I think I sourced this from another site. Nothing more than that, but also, I honestly, in apologetics, you go, as I said in the beginning class, you can go presuppositional and assume that case, but I'm treating as if there's reformed and non-reformed in this class, so I'm trying to teach objectively too. So, I mean, it's not as big of a deal.
Tier two.
What?
Tier two.
We're going to keep it
Tier
there.
two.
Well, kind of like
I need the kindergarten.
well, I mean, Jesus said, God, Lord, God forgive them, they know not what they do.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah,
That's okay.
were they forgiven?
because they didn't know what they did.
He did. He did.
I'm being.
And,
I know.
and
Yeah,
that's
that's
it.
it. Yeah, it's a potential. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and the stream now, so bye, interwebs world.
Right.